One, two, 3.
The Local Youth Worker is a podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. Since 1972, RYM has sought to reach and equip youth for Christ, and this podcast seeks to reach and equip those parents and youth workers who share that same desire. For more information on our student conferences, youth leader training, or resources, visit rym.org.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Local Youth Worker, a podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. I'm your host, John Parrott. This is episode 364, and I am here with Drew Tuberville. Drew, how's it going?
It's going good. Good to be here.
And I should have asked you this before I started recording. Am I saying your last name right, or is it Tuberville?
It's
Sorry. Let's just keep going.
It's Tuberville, but I accept Tuberville.
Okay.
I've been called Turtle Bomb. I also respond to Hey You. Yeah, it's all good.
Because, I thought Tuberville for the longest time, I think because of the coach.
Yeah, and my people ask me if I'm related to him, and I say when he was winning, yes, but not so much anymore.
Okay. Glad we recorded all that.
Yeah,
I'll
good.
I'll probably keep that in.
Yeah.
But Drew is here with me. Later in the episode, we'll have Dr. Dan Doriani talking in our Arrested Development segment. And then later we'll have Kurt and Lynn with us talking about frequently asked questions. But I'm here right now with Drew talking about an essential book for youth ministry. So, Drew, what you got?
Yeah, so I kind of divide books into two categories, like books that you read and then books that you use. Mm-hmm. And one of the books that I've used here recently in the past year has been Kevin DeYoung's book on homosexuality. Yeah. What does the Bible actually say or actually teach about homosexuality?
I always get that title wrong too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we used that. We did a semester-long study on just gender, sexuality, manhood, womanhood, LGBTQ issues, transgenderism, and Kevin DeYoung's book was massively helpful during that study because he just walks through everything so concisely and thoughtfully, and does it in a way that it doesn't come across as super heady and academic. Like I feel comfortable and have just given it to students for them to read it. And the reason why we used that book and the reason why I think it's essential for student ministry and for students is something I told our students that very quickly, if it hasn't already, sometime in the next 2 to 3 years in their lives, this is going to stop being just an issue that they hear about, and it's going to become a person with a face. Mm-hmm. It's going to be someone that they know and love who is going to struggle with homosexuality, and they need to know, what does the Bible say about this? How do I as a Christian need to think about this issue? Is it like any other sin? And I love how he ends the book because, I mean, let's be real, evangelical Christians haven't really done ourselves any favors with how we treat homosexuality and those who are homosexual. And so he ends it with how are Christians supposed to behave towards those who struggle with a homosexual identity. And he lands the plane on you love them as compassionately and as far as you can, so that you go up to the line of, if I cross that line, I'm dishonoring the Lord, but I'm going to love you as much as I can. The church is a place for broken people, sexually broken people, behaviorally broken people, and it's a place for people who struggle with this sin. So it's a massively helpful book.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, something I've said about Kevin DeYoung for years is that he really is just a brilliant scholar, but he has such a way of communicating difficult, challenging issues like this in a very accessible way. And so, I've used that book with our students. And I mean, one thing I like about it too is, I mean, not only all the footnotes in that book, you can tell he has done his research, because I know before he came into the PCA, he was really dealing with this issue with his previous denomination. But he's got the book divided into two sections. And so one, it looks at every single scripture reference, to homosexuality, but then the frequently asked questions. And so, yeah, that was a very helpful book. And Yeah, it was just opened the door for a lot of discussions with students. So
Yeah.
Sadly, in some ways, it's become an essential book for them.
Yeah, and I mean, the more that we can do I mean, when I was thinking back to my high school days, this was not something that was discussed.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't even on the radar of issues to think about. But just the way that the culture is going, I mean, we need to be doing all that we can. That's why we took a whole semester. Like, this is a hot thing going on in the culture right now. And a lot of most of our kids go to like Christian academies or Christian schools. But I mean, as much as we try to insulate our students from this issue, or really any issue, I think we kind of do them a disservice. You know, insulation is one thing, but education also has to be part of that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And when I say sadly, it's become an essential book of youth ministry. At the same time, there's an encouragement as we are dealing with issues from the culture. It sharpens us in our own theology, and not only what does the Bible teach, but okay, how can we, as you were pointing out, love these people who are struggling with this? So, Drew, that's a great book to recommend. Yeah, all those listening, I would say it's an essential for sure. So thanks for sharing that, Drew. Right now, here is Dr. Dan Doriani. Dr. Doriani, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you, John.
Good to have you. And I've also got Greg Meyer with me. Greg, how's it going?
It's going well. Glad to be here too.
Dr. Doriani, before we jump in, I know you wear many hats working at Covenant Seminary. You're an interim pastor, but you're also a podcaster yourself. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about your podcast and what you do there?
Yeah, so I try to interview interesting people, both thinkers, who can articulate their big ideas. So maybe close to half my guests are thinkers about any number of things. And the other half are workers, people who work in AI. I had a U.S. Senator, ambassador to Namibia, people who manufacture heating and air conditioning units, all kinds of things like that. People who are dedicated Christians who think hard about their craft. And some of them are famous and some are not. So we try to get all kinds of people talking about how their faith is put into practice in the workplace.
Yeah. No, I do like the spectrum. Like you said, some notable to not so notable. And one that I was just sharing pre-recording is Joe Buck. And that's a name many people will recognize. And he was at your church. Is that correct?
Yeah, he went to a Central Presbyterian Church, and we stayed in touch over the years too. But he's actually, he actually is a communications theorist to some degree. I mean, there's similarities between, believe it or not, between preaching sermons and broadcasting football games that he's very attuned to. So,
Yeah, that was a very interesting interview. I want to point people to that podcast and to that specific interview episode that you had. Our listeners know that this is our Arrested Development segment. And one thing about you, Dr. Doriani, is you have spent a great deal of time researching, reading, writing about, publishing books on the idea of work. And I'd love to just kind of hear some of the origins of that personally. What was it? I mean, I know we all have a job, we all have to work, but what was it that just kind of piqued your interest in this?
Yeah, probably two or three things. The first is that my two grandfathers were very, very different from each other, professionally speaking. One was a significant singer in the world of opera, and you can still find his programs on the internet from 90 years ago. And he was actually a painter of some note, and his works are in museums here and there throughout the world. And my other grandfather was a dirt farmer and a chicken farmer. And one was very famous and one was very non-famous and very non-prosperous. And they were both great men, and I loved them dearly. And it just hit me at a really early age. Wow, you can do things that are so different and find occupations and a living and joy in both of those very different lines of work. And then as a pastor, I had the blessing of churches with enormous diversity in the people who were in attendance. And so I just found it fascinating and always wanted to talk to them about what they do, why they do it, and how they practice their faith there. So I've interviewed hundreds of people. I'd say definitely over 500 people by now about their work. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And Greg, I want you to jump in, but I thought it'd be helpful as we're getting into, again, we're talking about rest and we're talking about work, but I'd love to just kind of set a foundation to define work for us. And maybe you could define it just kind of more generally, just a basic definition, but then also kind of biblically, some thoughts on work.
So did you ask me to do that, or did you ask Greg to do that?
I'm sorry. I asked you to do that. I realized.
I will
I
defer.
realized
I
the
will
way-
gladly defer on that one.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the short definition of work is a concentrated effort that is set to completing a task. The marshaling of skills and resources to accomplish something significant. So you could debate whether washing a car is work. Obviously, if you do it for a living, then it's work. But when I do it with my grandchildren, it's fuzzy boundary, because it's not quite clear whether the goal is to clean the car or to get each other wet and spread soap suds all over each other. But the idea of concentration and attentiveness to a significant task. What I'm doing there, of course, is not defining work as paid labor. So when we take care of our children, if you're, letting them roam around the house, it's not really clear if it's work or not. But when you're putting to bed, taking care of an infant, changing diapers, when you're preparing food, a nice meal for somebody, whether you're paid or not, that's work, because you're trying to get nourishment to family and maybe family and friends. By marshaling your resources, which in this case is food and, fire and pots and pans and so forth.
Mhm.
And of course, a lot of our work is compensated, and we call then that's a job. And at best, that's also a vocation or calling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Greg, please jump in.
Yeah. I know this happens, if you look back in history, there's different relationships, different cultures have with work and different viewpoints on work. My own reflection would be that in the Western culture, America specifically, we have an interesting, maybe contradicting relationship with work. As you've thought about work, as you thought about how we interact with it as Americans or just Western culture, what's our relationship like with work, and how did it get there?
Yeah, I think you're certainly right that it's conflicted. So for most of human history, people had to work or they simply perished. One thing we forget is until the year 1910, when we introduced means of fixing nitrogen in the soil, almost everybody was 2 harvests away from mass starvation. And now we have too much food and we have all these choices. And really, nitrogen fixation didn't become available to the wide populace till 1950, probably 1960, 1970, gets farther and farther throughout the world. So 200 years ago, 85% of all Americans were farmers because they had to be. I mean, they had to just put all that work into raising food. And, you made your own home to some extent. And so it's an absolute necessity. Today, we have it conflated with all the issues of abundance, such as fulfillment, happiness, and then questions like, what's your goal? Is it to earn as much as you can, retire early, gain status, gain security, or is your goal to find a job where you work 38 hours a week and you get enough so you can still be kayaking and rock climbing on weekends? You're not in subsistence status, right? You're still making something, but the goal is not to make as much as you can. And as you know, there'd be at least theoretically, or we say there's a gap between boomers and Gen Z on that front. Boomers are workaholics, allegedly, and often are. And Gen Z is, all a bunch of lazy bums who want to work as little as they possibly can. And of course, there have always been people who are lazy, and there are always people who work very hard. But there's probably some truth to the idea that we've changed our outlook in America and are less interested in accomplishing and working as hard as we can to get to the top than we were, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
This is a follow-up. I mean, have you seen how the pandemic has affected that? Has it made any big shifts, just as you've been reflecting on that experience?
Totally stole my question, Greg, by the way.
Yeah. Well, certainly, the pandemic did a lot of things. What we found out, of course, recently is that the Great Resignation is actually a misnomer and a mislabeled event. What actually was happening was people were taking a few weeks off while looking for the next gig that paid better. and it's just taking some benefits for a while, taking some vacation. So it's I don't think we've discerned fully yet what happened in the pandemic. We have learned that some people can work very effectively with no supervision at home, and we've learned that some people can't. And it's going to take a while to discern which workplace and which kind of worker fits where, because the hardworking, self-disciplined person probably does well only being in the office 2 days a week, because they're pulled away from their tasks to be social, which they don't want to be, but you can't afford to be a jerk, right? So you actually get less work done. And then, of course, if you're away all the time, you don't have that, let's say, a godly ferment of ideas when people bump into each other and say, man, I've got a problem. I'm so stuck. I'm just glad I saw you here at this lunch event, because I really need some help and you might be able to help me. So that has been lost to some extent. And we're going to have to sort out to what extent we need to be in each other's presence, and to what degree isolated work is actually best for many people, at least part of the time.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Doriani, just a minute ago, you were referencing a certain number of hours to work a week. And I'm sure many people may be aware of this. I am not, but kind of the origins of the, 40-hour work week, kind of where did that come from? And then I'd love for you to think just kind of biblically thoughts on that. What are your thoughts? 40-hour work week.
First of all, you can call me Dan, John.
Okay.
So I meant to say that earlier. Thanks, the first thing we want to say is that the way we view time today is so different from the way time was viewed in the Bible. In the Bible, it's in the Old Testament, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, and the seventh day Sabbath. And then with the resurrection of Jesus, that flipped. And so we start by taking a day off. It's like, hey, John, you have a new job. The first thing I want you to do is take a week of vacation. Mm-hmm. I love that so much, because it says, look, the beginning of your work week is to rest in Jesus and to pause and strengthened by your faith, by your presence in worship, hearing the word, praising God, you'll be better able to work this week. The 40-hour work week, first of all, assumes 5 days of work. And in the Bible, it does say we work 6 days. There's nothing wrong with working 4 days for labor, for pay, and working at home 2 or 5 and 1, or for that matter, if you can earn enough money and satisfy your employer in 3.5 days and do other things as a volunteer the rest of the week, or, take care of your house, build a house, why not, in your spare time? That's all good stuff. There's nothing wrong with any of that. Exactly why it's 48 hours or 40 hours a week, I don't know exactly why that is. It has something to do with breakfast and dinner at home. And it also has a lot to do with opposition to exploitation, which was so common in the early industrial age when people worked at the pace of machines so very much. But there are other factors which, I'm not sure we need to enumerate them, but 40 is allegedly the norm. I'm not sure if it really is or not.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a kind of maybe a follow-up question to that. Is there such a thing as moderation in how we approach our work and how much we work? Because everybody loves to say, "Oh, I'm really busy." Everybody's talking more about experiencing burnout and the effects of not caring for oneself. But at the same time, you have this Christian ethic of do everything excellently, always, all the time, and can get misapplied. And we can obviously be doing our work for the wrong reasons, or be putting the emphasis in the wrong place in our lives. But is there such a thing as moderation in our work?
Yeah, sure. There is definitely such a thing as moderation. And although the word moderation doesn't per se appear in the Bible, there are Greek words that could be translated, temperance could be translated moderation. It's possible to translate one of the words in the fruit of the Spirit as moderation. I'll say that much at least. Although the Bible doesn't stress moderation the way ancient Greeks did, they always held that virtue was, between the extremes. Courage is right between rashness, taking crazy risks, getting killed in war, and cowardice, running away from conflict. That was Aristotle. So we don't define virtue that way, but we do say self-control and temperance are commended in Scripture. I'm going to comment 2 other ways. First of all, I hate the idea that everybody should be busy. And people say to me, "Oh, Dr. D, I just don't want to ask you, you're so busy." I go, "No, I'm not busy. I have big projects. I have important projects, but I try not to be busy. Busy, who wants to be busy?" Eugene Peterson had a riff on that and said, other people do too. When you want to get away from real work, you get busy to give the appearance of doing stuff. Real work takes concentration, and it takes binging, like giving 6 or 12 or 15 hours in the span of 2 or 3 days to a task that cannot be interrupted. So busyness is actually the antithesis of productivity and getting stuff done. So a pox on busyness, number one. And also a pox on the idea that we should be excellent all the time. That's ridiculous. Who wants to write excellent emails all the time? Write pretty good emails that are clear enough. Who has time to be excellent at everything they do? I guarantee you, when I mow my grass, I do not aim for excellence. I aim to cut the grass. And if there's some huge tufts that I missed, I'll pick them up. But if there are a few tufts here and there, too bad. That's the way it goes.
So you're in favor of deep work and choppy yards. That's what we're saying.
I'm in favor of deep work. And if a choppy yard happens to be a negative side effect, I don't care.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I love it. And I love, your comment on busyness, and kind of redefining what that is. And look, we're at time right now, but I'm glad that you'll be with us for the next 2 weeks to revisit some of this. So Dan and Greg, thank you. Look forward to more next week. All right, today I have 4 guests with me, and Kurt is already saying this is going to be really tough, but we're going to see if this is going to work. So let me go this way, and everybody just say, "Hey, introduce yourself."
My name's Kurt, and this is going to be an absolute failure.
My name's Lynn. I'm really excited about it in spite of Kurt.
My name's Tree, and I think this is going to be somewhere in the middle.
My name's Chris, and I don't know what we're talking about.
So, we're in Colorado. It's a rainy day in Colorado. We're all indoors. We have no idea if students are going to come into this building. It could get kind of loud. But I'm looking forward to getting to talk to you guys. It's, as we said yesterday when we recorded, I guess that was last week, the one that aired last week. It's fun to be able to sit in each other's presence and actually have these conversations instead of looking through Zoom. Today, we've talked about doing frequently asked questions in youth ministry, or just kind of general questions, but we're actually going to talk about Lynn's elective, and just kind of see where that goes. And so, Chris, that's what we're going to be talking about. So you're aware. And everyone here is an elective teacher. I just realized that. So, thank you guys for serving RYM and teaching an elective. I don't know. We'll get back. Yeah.
I required my honorarium before I showed up. I got a T-shirt from 1973.
It's a collector's item. Yeah. So Lynn, why don't you briefly just tell us the title of your elective, blurb about it, and then we'll just kind of jump in and go from there.
Yeah, so the title is FaceTime versus Real Time, Having Real Conversations, or Let's Talk, something like that. And it was just about, I've seen a lot of social anxiety in our students, specifically since we went like virtual learning and now they're back in person if they want to be, and just how much anxiety that's been causing them. And then, of course, anxiety is like another one of those buzzwords like depression has been, or, just an extreme feeling. So I wanted to help equip students in ways that I've seen be helpful in my own life and in like the lives of people who are close to me. So that's what we did. So we did case studies from the Bible, like with Moses and God, and then the Samaritan woman and Jesus, and talked about keys to conversation and also like anxiety coping mechanisms, like healthy ones. We talked about unhealthy ones. And then the last day, which is my favorite, is when I like kind of forced them into practicing some of the things that they've learned. And we did almost like a speed dating sort of thing, but it was all about conversations. And it was like, you'd have 30 seconds to talk about a topic that I yelled at you. And then after that 30 seconds, the next person would you would just alternate people. So they would switch and I'd yell out a new topic. And
so they're all in different chairs. They move around. You give a topic and they just
there are 2 parallel lines, and then line A would shift to the left. Yeah. And so it would be a new person every time. And I had them write down nouns before. Yeah.
I never did speed dating. I don't Kurt's here.
I just want to inform John, because he's always asking about youth group games. We play a version of this game where we do the same exact thing, except we have a bunch of different two-person board games. So you play every 5 minutes. So you're always playing a new game every 5 minutes, and you're always playing against a brand new person.
Oh,
and
that's
it's kind of fun because sometimes people who normally wouldn't interact are going to interact over, Connect Four, or they may get in a fight over it. Who knows? Oh, that's a great question. So they're on teams. There's like one side is one team, one side is the other. I know this is not what the pod is about. So John is like panicking right now. But you pick up the game wherever you left off. So if it's like Monopoly, you pick up, and there's like a little thing that's like a little dial that says whose turn it is. And so you know whose turn it is when you switch to the new game or whatever. And there's a ton of two-person games you can use too. So yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Look, I love
That's
it.
great.
I think,
love
yeah.
games.
I mean, something similar that we did one time is on a charter bus. Kurt just said I'm trying to top his story. So the aisle seats would rotate like every 5 minutes just to make everybody talk to each other, and they had to put up their phones. So it was like our senior high; they had to all put up their phones and then talk to each other. Some students hated that. So no, interesting elective. Tree, Chris, Kurt, have you noticed issues in your own youth group on this topic about conversation struggles? Tree.
Yeah, I've noticed just over the years there's always the students that just don't know how to talk to anybody, and I'm always encouraging my students to try and like open up their circles a little bit, which is part of what my elective was about, is just finding ways to be more welcoming. But I've really tried to teach my students and practice this myself. Like the kids that like their interests are like universes away from mine. Like the books they read, the TV shows they watch, I could care less about them. But I love hearing them talk to me about them because I might be the only person that they can actually talk to about it. So just letting them talk, I think is awesome too, especially because many of the other kids in the youth group may not be interested in talking about those things. But I don't know. I mean, half the time I still have no clue what they're talking about. But at least they get to talk about it. So
you're talking about like your talk was on like building healthy relationships post-pandemic. Mostly?
No, it was more about how to engage, like to build those relationships, right?
Yeah,
how to
yeah.
even start a conversation in person instead of just being
yeah.
comfortable texting, right? Like,
That's so. What do you feel like is in the top 3 most important things you hope that a kid came away from in your talk?
One is I tried to emphasize that like no matter how good or bad you are at conversation, it's not the greatest thing about you, right?
Yeah.
Like whether you struggle with anxiety or you don't, or at whatever level you do, it's not your greatest identity.
Yeah.
And so no matter how far you come in learning how to have a conversation, or how many moments you miss in life because anxiety holds you back, again, like your identity in Christ is the greatest thing about you, and these are just blips in that moment. Also really hoped that students would feel equipped at least to make one step forward in this battle against anxiety. As I've seen specifically my sister, like as she's become equipped, just to see how much more life she gets to experience because she's not feeling so debilitated by her anxiety, whether that's just learning how to take a couple of deep breaths or grounding techniques, or one of our techniques was naming your anxiety. So I had all the students yell, "Silencio Bruno!" like they do from Luca, which is just really cool. And a student told me today he did that up on a hike the other day. He was feeling anxious about something he thought he looked stupid doing, and he was like, I named my anxiety Madison, which I think is a very common name, and he was just like, shut up Madison, shut up Madison. I was like, well, that's great. So that, and then a coping mechanism, and really just seeing like how easy it can be to have conversations. It doesn't have to be this big, like momentous, like I don't have anything interesting to talk about, so I'm not even going to take that step forward or whatever, but just actually saying like, hey, what did you do during free time? Like, there you go, door open, like the ball started rolling. It's easier than they think it is. Low stakes, really, you know.
Yeah, it helps to ask questions, and I find that students oftentimes they get caught up in how they're coming across in a conversation. It really helps to actually just be interested in the other person, right? It makes conversations a little less awkward. But when you're 16 and you're self-absorbed and you think that everything is about you, it really is hard to step outside yourself. And you know, all of us, the 5 of us in here, sometimes it's easy for me to think, why can't these kids reach out to the new kid or the quiet kid? Like, why can't they the new kid or the quad kid doesn't want to be friends with me. I'm a 40-year-old man. He or she wants to be friends with these other kids, and why? But that's where they are at this point. So just even encouraging them to just ask questions, to actually care about the person enough to ask questions, even about things that aren't interesting. It's really not that hard to be kind and be friends with someone. It's not like a complicated thing. You just have to step outside yourself, and it's really hard for a high school student to do that. We're not that far removed from this, but they are definitely not that far removed from having their parents drop them off like a block away, so they're not seen getting out of the minivan. And if you're that self-absorbed, man, it's going to be tough to like really engage with someone else. It makes it difficult.
Yeah, that's a good bit. Kurt, we talked, two of the like secret weapons that we talked about was that asking good questions, like just asking questions is a good way. Like if you're nervous about talking, well, if you ask questions, then they'll talk. Right. But then also we talked about cultivating curiosity. But then like this secret weapon that I call is tell me more. Like if you don't know what else to say, just ask them to tell you more. And they get to choose what to tell you, which tells you what is important to them. And then it helps you find that point of connection.
Yeah, this is such an interesting elective to me. Just curious, as you thought about this concept and you started to develop it more, what's something you learned just about conversation, or even from teaching it and getting questions from students and youth workers that are present? What are some things that kind of surprised you maybe about this subject?
Some of the things that are so simple, like one example I got of an anxiety-inducing situation for a girl was ordering food at Chipotle. She gets so nervous every time she has this like little mini attack that she's like, I can't talk to this woman. Like she's going to like think my burrito is so ridiculous or whatever. Like she was just like, yeah, I'd love for us to talk about how to do that. And then the 3 or 4 students was like, yeah, I feel the same when somebody comes up to me in not the grocery store, but the shopping mall. And it's like, hey, can I help you? And it's like, no, like I really like, please don't talk to me. Just that was really surprising to me. And something I learned, I think has been about this buzzword idea, right? Of only 13% of teenagers, 12 to 17, are actually diagnosably experiencing anxiety. Everybody else is on the spectrum, or we just need to learn a vocabulary of actually I'm feeling shy and not anxious, right? Or actually I'm feeling scared and not anxious. And how much developing a vocabulary has been even just helpful for me of like, okay, I'm feeling something, but it's not anxious. It feels like anxiety, but it's not. I'm actually shy. And so when to find out like only 13% of that age group is diagnosable, everybody else like is either feeling something. Well, they said that 40% of those students were actually feeling shy. So I was just really interested in like, we need to keep developing our vocabulary about how to help students express what they're feeling.
Is there like, I think about this all the time when I have a lot of kids that are introverted, and I'm very much an introvert too. And, but just in my age, I've just learned I've just got to hang out with people, but as far as like leaders, volunteers and things, what are healthy ways to train like leaders? Like I've got a good bit of introverts in my youth group, and I've also got a good number of introverted leaders too. What are like some good ways you think would be to train, apart from like listening to your talks, but would be good ways to train like leaders to engage with more introverted kids?
That's a good question. And for me, I think in hindsight, I can see where I've maybe cornered kids into engaging I didn't read, they're feeling very uncomfortable right now. Like to be better about reading the room, that's something I could grow in. And I think that's something that our leaders, like just be aware of. We don't need to force kids into being something, right? But at least letting them know, like, hey, I see you. And whenever you're ready to, like, get in the pool and talk, like, we can do that, right? So I think that. But also, as we build relationships with students, teaching leaders how, like, what mechanisms are helpful for when our students are feeling that way. So just even one, after a YLT training, actually, we had Sissy Goff there, and she talked about the 5 senses and how when somebody starts to have an anxiety attack or feel it coming on, you can ask them, like, tell me 1 thing you can see, 2 things you can smell, 3 things you can taste, 4 things you can hear, and 5 things you can feel, or something like that. And it's just a grounding mechanism. I had no idea before, and I've used it on some students since then, and that, like, it was just so helpful for getting them out of that spiral. So I think teaching them coping mechanisms and also how to read the students of, like, this one you can push a little bit more, but this one you shouldn't. Yeah.
to hear you talk about the students that clearly just don't want to be there. Like, not even the introverts, just the ones that just are flat out. And I say that because I was that kid. Like, I would hide in my room on Wednesday nights hoping my mom would forget that it was Wednesday night, just so I wouldn't have to, wouldn't have to go to youth group, because I didn't know anybody and I didn't want to be there. So, like, what would be some tools that we can put in our tool belts to help maybe re-engage? I don't know if re-engage is the right word, but engage those kids that are just like, they're there because their parents are making them be there, and they cannot wait till their parents come to pick them up, or they just go off and hide somewhere. Had that happen too.
That's these are great questions, by the way. So I was also, I wasn't really that student, but my first youth group ever, I was 16. I had an eyebrow ring, and I sat next to my sister who had a lip ring. She sat next to a boy who had yellow pants, and then a girl who had pink hair, and nobody talked to us for the whole 2 hours of youth group. That was my first youth group. Yeah, it was the yellow pants and the pink hair. It wasn't me and my lip ring. Yeah,
she was also scowling at everybody. She just growled at everyone. She's not mentioning that part.
Kurt was there. He didn't say hi either. But yeah,
that's where I lost my pinky finger. So,
but yeah, so I've also had that experience of like, oh my gosh, when is my dad going to be back? Right? I think maybe we talked about it, but before, it's really important to listen or to read the room, right? Of what does this kid find interesting, right? So they probably don't want to talk about Jesus or want to talk about scripture or golf. I don't know if that's what you want to talk about. Whatever it is, they know what makes them light up. And we talked in the seminar about finding that point of connection, right? Is like what makes them light up, and then you talk to them about that. And so it is kind of a like if you can get them to talk to you, right? Because it's also, man, with teenage girls sometimes when they get their sassy pants on, it's just like, okay, like I'm gonna have to go through. Teenage boys have sassy pants too, yeah.
I have sassy pants.
Yeah, so I think it's the like
yellow sassy pants.
It's the finding, okay, I'm going to try at least to find what makes this kid light up, even if it's not something that's relevant to anything we're doing here. So they at least know, like, I see that you're a human being. You have a favorite color. Like, I get that you don't want to be here, but just I don't only want to talk to you when you want to be here, right? Like, going past that.
How do you engage with, like, because, you get, like, the cool kid clique, right? The weird kid clique, and then whatever else, God's provided. But, like, I always find it challenging, like, to engage the cool kid clique that, I'm weird, so I don't feel intimidated by them, but there's this, maybe I am intimidated by them. There's this presence around them that sometimes, I've heard leaders say, Chris, honestly, I'm kind of ready for them to graduate. And so I can hang out with the nerdy kids that are insecure like I am, like, so what are ways that you can engage with, like, that cool clique that could be intimidating, the good-looking kids or, like, the sporty kids or whatever, and not just pour all of our time into, like, other groups?
That's also a good question. Does anybody, do you have some?
Well, I was just going to say, it's funny that you say that, Chris, because anyone who meets me knows that I've never been the best athlete in any collection of any people. And never the best looking person in any group. And it's tough. It's tough to believe, but yeah, it's tough. Turns out you can't teach handsome. So, but then I came to Montgomery, and no, everyone seems to be really with it actually, and in our youth group, and there's something that we deal with on a daily basis, is that we've got really phenomenal athletes or really pretty girls or handsome guys, it's not even about those things really. It's just about how, I think what intimidates people is how comfortable they are in their own skin, right? Because they've got all these problems, and we've got really wealthy students too, or as I like to say, well-resourced students. And one thing I think is really interesting about that is, one, some people think, oh, you're at this church and they have a lot of money or whatever. It must be easy to be a minister there, as if rich people don't have any problems. They're just rich people just have, some of the most insecure students I've ever had are the best looking ones or the most athletic ones. Absolutely. And I think it's on us as youth ministers to do two things. One, to educate those kids about who they are and how they come off, so that they can do ministry and engage with kids who aren't as cool or aren't together and with it. But also on the same side, to not turn those kids who are a little bit awkward or maybe bookish or nerdish, to not turn those kids into Pharisees and be like, yeah, that pretty girl can't have real faith, because everything's easy for her. Man, that's not something we want to be creating either. So it's kind of like a two-way street in my experience. It's like, hey, everybody's got something to offer, right? And, society values different people's gifts differently. But, what does Paul say? We're a body. I'm not going to quote scripture, you guys. You guys all know it anyway. But we're a body, and we have many different members, right? We all can't be elbows. We all can't be knees. We all can't be whatever, So I think it's a difficult thing. But, I think my tendency is to jump over with the less athletic or the less, pretty people and be like, yeah, look at them. They're, that's even worse. That's a mistake you don't want to make. You also don't want to try to be cool, by the way. If any youth ministers listen to this, never try to be cool. You aren't cool. You never were cool. If you try to be cool, it'll ruin your ministry. I'm going to give up the mic now.
I was just about to say, sincerely, talk about that a little bit more. What do you mean? Don't no, you go for it.
No, see, here's John. Here's John sucking up to Lynn by using the tell me more thing that she just told us to do. John's like,
it really works.
Tell John. Look,
I could just tell it lit a fire, and so I want to see you just keep going.
Everyone likes you. You don't have to do anything extra. We're all here for you, so you don't have to I'm sure everyone. I mean, you're the only doctor here, right? All that to say is that one time they asked me to teach an elective at YLT they told me I could teach on anything I wanted, and I decided to call it "You Were Never Cool," and I talked about my first time doing youth ministry and how I thought I would make these kids like me by being the really cool youth minister, and it was such a huge mistake. One, I'm not cool. Two, I've never been cool. And three, being a youth minister is not my opportunity to finally be cool, right?
Yeah.
It's not. And if you do that, all you do is you just completely undercut your message of the gospel, right? Because another thing you'll do, and I'm not going to name check anybody, but some ministries, this is part of their philosophy, is you end up trying to grab just the cool kids, right? And you're the others will come with them or whatever. What a dangerous and anti-gospel idea to have, right? It's we're going to go after the cool kids and then maybe we'll get the stragglers along with them. So all that to say is that if you are listening to this and you're a youth minister, that's going to be a temptation that you have. It's certainly a temptation that I have, and it's a huge mistake to fall, to give in to that temptation. Yeah, and you have to learn to talk about things that aren't cool, right? Like what Tree and what Lynn was saying, very important. I talk about deer hunting a lot. I've never killed a deer. Okay?
I've never hunted a day in my life.
Oh, I've been turkey hunting. So I
killed a turkey?
No, they took me turkey hunting as a joke, and I made a bet with my youth that if I could kill a turkey, they would all have to join youth choir because none of them wanted to be in it. I am not in it. So then I post on Instagram, and it's me in all camouflage, and it says gobble gobble, and all these boys are like, "Did you get one?" Wait, they're all getting nervous or whatever. But no,
that was really cool. So look, I know it's. I feel like we're just opening up a can of worms. We're past 20 minutes, and I know we're drawing this to a close. Last thoughts. I mean, Lynn, Tree, Kurt, Chris, anybody? Just kind of some last comments on this whole conversation about conversation. I was trying to think of another word, but it just came out. Any other thoughts from this?
I think for me, at least, it's been really encouraging when the students come up, and this is a workshop leader thing of it's so encouraging when the students come up and say, hey, this was really helpful, right? Or I actually did this thing, or oh, I never heard it that way before, right? Of just how even that little encouragement can be so uplifting for us from our students. So when I think about how much it must mean to them when we notice things that they do, or like personalize something for them. Oh my gosh, I saw you talk to that person on the bus who hasn't talked to them before. How much it air it must give them under their wings. Is that the I don't think that's a metaphor.
Well,
Yeah, just thinking of, like it goes such a long way. So when I think about like anything that we do to model good conversation or asking questions or being interested even when you know you're not into the topic, or like being authentically who you are if that's not who you're cool. Like I just forget sometimes how much students watch us like do everything.
That's a good word. And again, just such an interesting elective to have, but it's hopefully instructive to all of us to realize that, yes, conversation is just something students can kind of naturally do, but also at the same time, they've got to be instructed in this. This needs to be something that youth workers think about, just teaching students on how to have conversation, and those parents who are listening, practicing that in the home. And I mean, maybe, again, we're closing this out, but the entire busyness epidemic of students not being in the home and sitting around a dinner table having discussion as a family, maybe that's an aspect of all this. But look, Tree, Lynn, Kurt, Chris, thank y'all for being a part of this. Good to see y'all.
Oh, come and buy without money. Oh,